What's the most messed up thing someone has told you about themselves after barely getting to know them? Started to work with my coworker and he kept falling asleep on me. On day 2, I asked him if he was okay because he constantly falls asleep. He tells me he has insomnia. Makes sense, I feel bad for the guy. An hour goes by, he nods off again, and this is scary because he's a driver. I yell, "Wake up!" He jolts awake, goes back to driving, apologizes, then begins telling me what happened and why he can't sleep. About 10 years ago, he was going through a divorce. Apparently, his daughter's bedroom got broken into. The criminal went to the mother's bedroom and terminated her. A couple of weeks later, they found the guy while he, the father, was taking care of his daughter. Harmed multiple times and terminated in a random town nearby somewhere in a ditch. He goes on to say the cops arrested him right away since he was the number one suspect, questioning him about the situation, to which he had no clue what they were going on about. He had to get a lawyer, and after a few days of questioning, they had to release him because they had no evidence that it was him. His voice changed when he told me this, and while he said, "He was a friend of the family's, I wonder what happened to him. Guess we will never know, but they got nothing on me," in a more menacing voice. After a long pause, it seemed like he caught himself and turned to me and said back in his original fun guy sweet voice, "But I wasn't anywhere near, so I don't know how they did suspect me for it, and that's why I have trouble sleeping every night for the last 10 years. I just got chills and thought to myself, holy crap, you did it, didn't you?" Well, that's more sad than anything. Poor guy had his whole life ruined and now probably suffers from guilt for terminating the guy. Story 2. Worked in a catalog store and sold a middle-aged lady a dictaphone after she sheepishly asked me if there was something she could use to record people without them knowing. It was weird, but who am I to judge? I just work the tills and suggest the items. However, she then decides to tell me she needs it because she's being pestered in her home, so she buys the dictaphone and I think nothing of it. On my next shift, she is back in and demanding to speak to me about the device. First words out of her mouth are, "Should there already be voices on it?" I was kind of weirded out and surprised to hear that the device had already been used. But then she leans across the counter and suddenly begins telling me, in a whispered tone, that she is being attacked by spirits in her home and she needs proof. She plays the dictaphone without being prompted to do so. Anyway, there's nothing ghostly on it, just some mundane household sounds and EastEnders, a British soap opera. She became quite fond of me, came in repeatedly to tell me about the ghost, but it just seemed so crazy that within like 2 shifts, she had unloaded all of her delusions on me. She even asked to know where I had gone after moving away. My old colleagues obviously didn't tell her. She was just a harmless lady and a little bit odd. So is this where we guess she had a carbon monoxide leak in her house? Story 3. When I was around 10, I lived beside this weird family. The little girl was probably 4 or 5, always clinging to me anytime we were outside. She talked incessantly and always wanted to hang out with me, asking to come into my house. She annoyed me so badly, but she was really sweet and excited about everything. One day, she told me, "Do you ever wrestle with your dad?" I told her that's really weird and no, I don't even know what that means. She then tells me she and her dad and her brother wrestle a lot. Forgive me, but I was 10, I had no idea what I was being told. I still think about that to this day, and the guilt eats at me. I wish I had understood more and told someone. I also had a classmate in high school I'd give rides to and from school so she wouldn't have to make her dad do it. After we graduated, I saw her working at the mall. She then told me her dad used to mistreat her and she was finally able to see a therapist and work through it. When someone says these things happen more often than we realize, they're not wrong. I've had years and years of training on signs of this type of mistreatment, and it will forever break my heart and make me so angry. It's unfathomable. Story 4. I'm a female and I met a girl at a local coffee store. There were regulars coming there for months, so we chatted casually. But one day I was going to drive to see friends 3 hours away for a fun-filled weekend. She said it sounded fun, and I don't know why, but I invited her. She said yes, and I picked her up the next day. Mind you, we were both around 19. Well, it was a 3-hour journey of hearing her life stories. She told me she was bulimic and she used to hide jars of retch under her bed from her parents so she wouldn't get in trouble. She ran away and left them there. Then I heard about an Amtrak ride she took when running away that was 3 days long. She met an older couple there and spent the 3 days doing substances. I'm sure there was more, but those things stuck with me. She ended up getting pregnant by another guy at the coffee store who she constantly told everyone how big his thing was. I never saw her after that. Naive 19-year-old me just sat there driving and thinking, holy hell. Me now is still thinking, holy hell, to be honest. I hope she's okay. 19-year-old me had no idea how to support her. Story 5. I had to pick up a friend of a friend from her job before going to a party. I never met her before that night. When I got out of the car at her job site, she came out screaming and running towards me and jumped into my arms like we were longtime friends. This was in Canada, so I shrugged it off as some strange Canadian greeting. We went back to the hotel suite to prepare for the party with a few other people. We were drinking heavily and making small talk when I mentioned I gotta hop in the shower before the party starts. All of a sudden, she sniffs her hand and making a face, she says, "Yep, I need one too. I'll join you." Before I knew what was happening, she grabbed my arm and was pulling me to the bathroom. Keep in mind, this all happened in front of several people. They knew her, but I didn't, and they were laughing. Apparently, she had a reputation of being a sort of crazy, free-spirited person. I was too hammered to think about what was happening, was kind of in shock. I didn't know if she was weird or was coming on to me, but I did need to take a shower, so I went along with it. Later that night, we ended up running around Toronto, singing and dancing in a mess of a good time. It was certainly the strangest interaction I've had with someone I just met. I'm a guy and there was no intimacy, just an unexpected and friendly shower with a girl I met that night. Strange Canadian greeting indeed. Story 6. In my third year university, heading home from a late night of studying for midterms, I met a kid crying in one of the stairwells of the university center. I asked him if he was all right and sat down with him. He was a foreign student. His English wasn't strong, but he said his life was over. Family was going to disown him. He had nowhere to go, etc. So I asked some more questions, and then he came out and said he thinks he's not straight, and his parents are from a conservative culture which says it's not okay. He doesn't know anyone here other than a few ultra-conservative foreign students from his country, and he felt like there was nothing he could do, nowhere he could go, all that. I felt so bad for the guy. He asked if he could hug me, which was a bit awkward, but I said yeah and held him for a bit. Then we spoke for another 30 minutes, and I told him all about the free counseling options at the school and how nice and understanding they were for my mental issues. Told him that his view to his gender wasn't as rare as he thought, and there were plenty of non-straight people at the school, some of whom felt just like him. I gave him a business card for the counselor I was seeing, gave him my number if he wanted to talk, and headed out. He called me to talk and met up on campus and thanked me a few weeks later, and then I never saw him again. I hope the dude's found comfort in his own skin and a happy life in Canada. Story 7. I was 11 years old at camp. I was a quiet girl who just wanted to read in her corner, who didn't want to be there. I struggled to make friends, but I wasn't really trying anyway. So this loud, talkative girl befriended me. She said every bad word, and she was, IDK, rough around the edges. I was a bit curious about her, but I was trying to shake her off during the first day. She was sometimes insulting and quite abrasive. Anyway, on the second day, she spent most of the day describing how her mother was mistreating her and her siblings, how she had tried getting away through the window, how Child Protective Services didn't do anything, how her dad was every bit just as bad, so it was a relief he was gone, how she rarely ate enough and her mom would deprive her of supper every other day, how she had 2 younger siblings, so she took the worst of the mistreating to protect them. I remember being completely shaken by her story. I come from a loving family with healthy parents, and it was the first time I even considered that a parent would harm their child this way. I remember telling my parents that night, and I don't think anything ever came of it. Story 8. Was in a bar in Tokyo and another foreigner started chatting me up. There were a few girls we talked to, but nothing was really happening. He had some suggestions for other places to drink, so we took a train up to Shibuya. On the way, he decided, unprompted, to let me know that the girl at the last bar said she was 23 but was probably lying, which made me internally freak out and happy we got out of there. But he followed up with, yeah, she was probably 27 or so, which is way too old for me. Setting the stage, this guy was white and looked 30-ish, balding and with a gut, spoke fluent Japanese, so he was super confident chatting up random girls. I asked why 27 was too old. He was older than her, right? He followed up with, yeah, I usually try to meet girls. I didn't even answer, just got myself lost in the crowd once we got off the train at Shibuya Station and never saw the guy again. Story 9. In my second year of high school, I ended up in a class with a girl who liked to be the victim. After knowing her for a short while, she started telling me in detail about her multiple attempts, how her dad would hurt her and that he would start hurting right in front of her, but he didn't do it correctly, so she had to show him how to do it properly. She would also tell in detail about how she liked to hurt herself. Most of what she said about it was lies. She often had exposed arms and there were hardly any marks on them at all. A guy who sat down next to me on a train once wanted to teach me how to make explosive gases by moving air back and forth between my lungs and my bowels. A former user who had found the Lord once stopped me in a parking lot and told me that he could heal my asthma with the power of Jesus. Then he started using his hands to guide the divine powers through me. I did not have asthma after he was finished, but I did not have it before he started either. So the jury's still out on how well this healing technique actually worked, but at least it was nice of him to be concerned about a stranger's well-being. That's more than I can say about some other people I have met. Story 10. I was on my way to a concert with this girl I really liked at the time. This was probably the second or third time we ever hung out. She goes on to tell me that her mother was bad at substances when she was growing up. I don't quite remember the details, but somehow her mother left her at her dealer's house. There were 4 men there. This girl then proceeded to tell me that they were all whacked out on substances and each one mistreated her. It gets cringy from here. Apparently, this girl, when she was older, went back to that house, then abandoned, and cast some sort of witchy spell or something, or released demons or something. I don't really remember. She did some sort of Tumblr witch thing, and I guess the following years, each one of those men ended up either terminated or with some sort of lifelong illness. I don't believe in anything like that, so I was already thinking this witch is weird as hell. A few years later, I ended up becoming really close friends with her childhood best friend, and that friend told me none of that happened. It was all a lie. Why would her lifelong best friend not know about that, but she told some guy she barely knew on the way to a concert? The friend later asked her about it, and she said that never happened and tried to deny everything. Story 11. Definitely going to get buried, and it's not messed up that the person shared it, but rather that these events happened. A friend of mine and I were sleeping on some couches after a party, and we got to talking. More so her than me. I'm definitely a better listener than talker. She confided in me that she watched her boyfriend, might have been fiance, pulled a weapon and ended himself in front of her. She also told me how she and her best friend of years, someone I knew for a very short time, had been urban exploring on a smokestack catwalk in an abandoned paper mill, and she watched her friend miss a step and fall. She wasn't making these things up either. The next day, I mentioned to our mutual friend that she had opened up to me about the stuff, and he confirmed it was sadly true about the boyfriend ending it all. The accidental passing I had known about through the news, I didn't know she was a person with her, though. Poor girl witnessed the loss of 2 very important people to her, and at the time she was only 19, 20 when she told me this. I hope talking to a near stranger helped, though, even if all I did was listen. Story 12. Oh man, a few years ago we hired this new cook. Nice enough guy, just a little eccentric. We caught him doing karate moves on the railing out back. He ran home to get his banking info for direct deposit during the orientation when the manager told him he could just bring it in the next day, stuff like that. Anyway, one day during a dinner shift, I'm in the server station with my work wife, and we're just getting stuff ready for our tables and such, and out walks Andrew. I'm like, oh hey man, how's it going? Not so good. I got some bad news today. And me, like an idiot, asks, oh no, do you want to talk about it? Yeah, I got my friend this kidney off the market, but it was the wrong type. Guys, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't even remember the rest of the conversation after that sentence. I think I blocked it out. All I remember is, sorry man, good luck, as he walked away and then looking at my work wife like I heard him wrong. Right? And her confirming that we did in fact hear him correctly. Do not buy kidneys off the market, I guess. Story 13. I was running some errands in my hometown on foot because I don't drive when a homeless man struck up a conversation with me. I got some weird vibes from him, but I exchanged pleasantries with him as it was still early enough in the evening that the downtown area was still busy and crowded. Eventually, he decides to tell me that he talks to the devil that lives in the trash cans. I guess old Lucifer teleports himself from trash can to trash can just to have conversations with this guy. Got a little bit more uncomfortable after that, but then he got even weirder. He tells me his mom passed away 10 years ago, but that he can still see her, but only with his left eye. Apparently, he's legally blind in that eye, but can see rainbows with it, and his fallen mother will step out of said rainbows and talk to him. Yeah, I noped out of there right quick, pointed to a random dude walking by, said that he was my friend and I was supposed to meet him. Ran to catch up with the random, whispered a request to just go along with me for a minute, and walked half a block with him before realizing I did actually know him and we had been friends in high school. Small world. Story 14. Oof, this is going to be a long one, so buckle up. I live on a shared property. There's about 4 different households on the property. Our lease is almost up, so we'll be able to move on soon, thankfully. Husband and I are super introverted, and we have an almost 8-year-old little girl. The other households are not our type of people. We're not prudes by any means. We're cool hanging out with people we gel with, but the other households are all older and, to be honest, toxic as hell. The first time I met my neighbor 2 doors down from us, she was hammered. I'm talking, staggering, and slurring her words hammered. I was playing with my kid in my fenced-off garden, and she just invites herself into my yard, opens the gate, tries to stagger towards my kid. I call my kid to me immediately, telling her to back off. Side note, I don't care if I offend adults when it comes to the safety of my child. I am that type of mama. I will throw it down for my kids' safety. She recognizes what she has done, paints a weird smile on her face, and tries to introduce herself. I send my kid inside quickly and ask her what she thinks she is doing just opening my gate. That's rude. She watches my kid run inside and says, I'm a mom too. So I go, okay, please get out of my yard. I didn't invite you in. She then starts repeating, I'm not a bad person, over and over again, and I firmly tell her to leave. My husband recognizes that something is up. He steps outside, and this hammered witch starts ambling towards him, repeating that she's not a bad person over and over again to him. He's softer than I am and goes, nobody said you were, but you do need to leave. She then goes, my children were taken from me. I'm not a bad person. Please don't hide your little girl from me. I won't hurt her. And my hackles went up. I shouted at her to get out of my gate and garden to never come back. The neighbor that is immediately next door to us heard the commotion and realized that she was missing a party guest and comes up to the fence. Seeing what's going on, she starts apologizing to me, blaming the drinks for this woman's bizarre behavior, and managed to get the woman out of my yard by tempting her with more drinks. And that is how Creepy Tanya got her name. They tried once after that to get husband and I to join them for a braai, a barbecue to anyone who was in South African, by knocking on my back door and greeting me with that creepy smile of hers, but my face does this thing where it mirrors what I'm thinking, but so does my mouth. I told her that we are not going to be friends and to please never come near us ever again, that she made me incredibly uncomfortable, and that was it. I shut the door. Immediate neighbor tried to talk to me about it, saying, oh, she's a sweet person. But I shut that right down and told her straight, she can be as sweet as sugar, but we are adults. I'm not obligated to give this woman any of my time. I still have no clue how creepy Tanya lost custody of her kids, and it may not seem like a big deal to some, but guys, this is South Africa. You have no idea how bad things have to be for the government to step in and take your kids. I was severely mistreated, part of the reason why my hackles went up around this woman, and they didn't take me, so I cannot help the ominous feeling I get when I think what in the world this woman must have done to lose her kids. Then, on top of that, to intoxicatedly approach my kid? My gut feeling is usually right. It was a survival mechanism growing up, so I usually listen to it. Creepy Tanya can stay in her corner. She has not tried to approach us again. I think she learned. And if you're enjoying the video or learning a thing or two about it, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 14. I was at a bus stop at Ocean Beach in San Francisco. It was 8 or 9 at night, and OB was really desolate and foggy at that hour. Very haunted house vibe. So I'm waiting for the Muni, which takes forever, and there's a woman next to me talking about how she hates newspapers and hates the press, blah, blah, blah. This was like 1997, so way before this was a common thing. Having nothing else to do, I decided to engage her about why she hates the press. Then she started going on and on about how they lie, not very original. I'm beginning to fear this ain't the jackpot of a story I was hoping for. But then she says, I mean, what do you do with a terminated figure? And there it is. She starts talking about how much she lives with her mother and it wasn't easy to let her go, so she didn't. So a few weeks prior to this evening, a woman in the neighborhood I was sitting in was busted because she was chasing her mom's social security checks. They did a welfare check on her mom who lived with her, and she was gone in her chair in the living room. So apparently this was that woman. I really believe she was innocent and the problem did just get away from her as she was responsible for caring for her mom and was regularly cashing her checks and shopping for her as the mother couldn't leave the house. Story 15. I was on a university trip to New York. There were people from my course year group and people from the same course in the year below. Naturally, I knew a lot of the students in the year below by their faces, but only a couple of them I knew enough to speak to. On the morning we were leaving, I was waiting in line to use the toilet at the hotel we were staying at before getting the coach to the airport. Super hungover after a heavy night of drinking, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I'm standing, waiting for the toilet, and a guy from the year below walks up behind me. We've never met, we've never spoken. I awkwardly smile at him and say hi, feeling hungover and an anxious mess. He says to me with a serious face, I soiled my pants earlier. I was walking down Fifth Avenue, and I farted but accidentally soiled, so I came back and had to clean up. I was obviously gobsmacked. The funny bit is my best friend who came along on the trip but wasn't a student at the uni was sitting next to the guy on the plane. He was messaging me saying he could very faintly smell it. Story 16. So I'm late to this, so like 4 people are going to see this at most, but here it goes anyway. I'm going to keep details scarce on this man because I honestly think he's a good guy despite this, just an odd duck. So this guy I met at a party tells us as a group like 2 hours after most of us have met him, some pretty wild stuff. Most of this group was pretty openly weird, which goes some way towards explaining him being quite this forward, but yeah, it was still a lot even for the crowd. So the guy likes playing with his back, tells us he once put a bunch of marbles up there. Now, he's no fool, so he made sure to keep count of the marbles. Don't want any complications from one being left behind, right? 50. Yep, 50 marbles go in, back there. He attends to himself, and when he's done, he counts the marbles on the way out. There are 51. He counts them again and again. There are undeniably 51 marbles. Now, of course, the logical explanation is that he miscounted on the way in, but it's becoming a running gag amongst everyone else there that night that the man's back contains a portal or something, from whence the 51st marble. Story 17. All right, I created a whole new account to tell this story, so blow it up or whatever. Back about a decade ago, I was in a bar on an island in Nicaragua, saddled up for a siesta drink or 3 next to some other expat who was already at the bar and ended up spending a couple of hours there. Just me, a bartender, and a 60-year-old expat. This dude gets deep in the sauce and starts telling me the wildest story. Back in the 70s, he's worked in a pharma lab and was in charge of the animals, namely the pigs. His job was to make sure they were fed and cared for and whatnot. Well, his favorite pig, this big buck hog, got sick and he was told to put it down. He couldn't, so he pulls up late at night and packs it into the back of his Pinto or whatever and takes it home to care for it. He turns his living room into a pigsty and nurses the pig slowly back to health over several weeks. Sleeping next to the pig, caring for it, hand-feeding it, etc. He loved this pig and wanted it to get better. Me and the bartender are full into the story and we're getting some local eye-blinding moonshine at this point and getting into it. This old hippie is just staring off into the distance and starts tearing up, says, as it got better, it got more and more aggressive. It was a breeding pig and was used to rutting all the time and just kept getting worse and worse. So he tried doing something to see if he could release some tension, and that just didn't work. Me and the poor bartender are just staring, horrified, and this dude with his 1,000-yard stare at the wall starts full-on bawling and says through sobs, there are no words for the emotion or facial expression that me and that bartender had. This dude just starts sobbing uncontrollably. Between sobs, he finishes the story. They found out he took the pig and sent security in to take the pig away from him, and because he had it outside the lab for so long and other stuff, they put down the pig and fired the guy, obviously. I didn't know what to do, so I just put some money on the counter, flashed the bartender a terrified look, and walked away, leaving that poor dude just head down sobbing on the bar top. And, as much as that story is really messed up, he had been carrying that thing around for 40 years. I hope telling it brought that dude some kind of peace. Story 18. So I don't know if this is entirely on point. 30 years ago, I was working in the Seychelles as a consular officer. You can imagine, I was young, in my 20s, and it was pretty sleepy. Old rich guy loses his passport, sailor gets sick, child of U.S. citizens born. One day this guy comes in. I read him as just a boat bum, ruffled hair, deep tan, oft-mended sailor shorts. And so he was, a boat bum, sailing around the world on a pittance in a rough little sailboat. I invited him into my office, offered him coffee, this is the Seychelles, and asked what I could do for him. He warms up by telling me he'd left LA a year and a half ago, sailing slowly across the Pacific. So, what can I do for you, sir? I ask, and he replies, I needed to introduce myself to you. Somebody is trying to terminate me, and if it happens, you will immediately know who did it because I will tell you right now. It turns out that he was in Tahiti at some anchorage, and there was an American couple there too, and as sailors do, they got chummy. It was a couple, an older guy and a younger, cute wife/girlfriend. He soon learned she was the girlfriend, so they fraternized there. He sailed on, they got to another island in Polynesia, ran into each other again. And one night, he brought over a special bottle of scotch, and between the wine of the couple and my interlocutor's scotch, they get pretty hammered, start talking about life, how they got into sailing, etc. At some point, the husband goes below deck, and the girlfriend starts telling him how they really got to achieve their dream of sailing to Bora Bora. The older man/husband had been a businessman in San Francisco. He'd bought their boat with a boat partner. Way more boats than he could afford, but with a boat partner, you get twice the boat, right? They were friends in the same circles in SF. So once they got the boat, the older guy convinces his boat partner that he intends to sail to Alaska, so they trick it out for blue water cruising, spending almost a year doing this. Then one day, it's all ready, and it's the guy's turn to take the boat for a week out into the Pacific, and he dumps his wife, picks up his girlfriend, loads a ton of provisions up, and sets sail for the Galapagos Islands. So basically, he's just stolen his boat partner's half of his sailboat. At this point, the older dude comes back on deck. He was below decks, remember? He's angry that his girlfriend has let the cat out of the bag. It's not immediately clear how angry. But as the night rolls on, the guy in my office in Seychelles realizes the older dude is trying to steer him into thinking the girlfriend was joking, then figures out how long he was going to be at that anchorage, then where he was going next. He starts getting this weird vibe, like this guy was gonna end me. As they tried to turn it into a joke, the boat partner in SF was rich. He wouldn't miss the money. He'd collect insurance. They'd never find the boat, as a boat partner would peg him in the Pacific Northwest because he'd never discussed a circumnavigation. Then it got pretty dark, pretty scary, and my interlocutor begins to realize this is not a good situation. He knows too much, and he's in the middle of nowhere with these people who have robbed a $500,000 boat and could easily make him disappear. Long story short, he rows back to his own boat, sleeps uneasily. In the morning, the formerly friendly vibe has gotten really ugly with the other people. Not just ugly, but scary. The girlfriend looks super scared when they talk again. Invites continue, but they're really weird. He's just being pumped for information, like they're trying to get him intoxicated, like they want to know if they can convince him to sail with them someplace isolated. A wind came up in the afternoon when they were ashore. My man just sailed right out of the anchorage, and for the next 6 months as he sails from Polynesia, then south and west, he finds out they're chasing him through the islands. They chase him for a year all the way through Indonesia and the Indian Ocean to Diego Garcia. So in Seychelles, he visits me with a simple message. He gave me an envelope with the name of the couple, as he knew their name and he thought it was right, but he wasn't sure. And he told me they'd been catching up with him. He'd heard through the grapevine they'd asked for him at Diego Garcia, a U.S. Navy base which tolerates sailors going through. He didn't trust the authorities, but he was willing to take a chance on me. If I didn't get a postcard from Cape Town within 60 days, I was to assume he was terminated, contact his family, and report the name of the boat and his pursuers to the authorities. About 2 months later, I got his postcard from South Africa, so I knew he survived, at least up until Cape Town. Story 19. The sad story of crazy Sarah. If you're out there reading this, I'm sorry. Sarah was hired at my pub and had to be the most candidly messed up person I've ever met. On her very first shift, she came out and told everyone that the toilet was clogged and someone had to fix it because she had anxiety. We were like, what the hell? And she kind of laughed and put her hand on her head and said something like, this is so embarrassing, but I'm bulimic and I had kind of a big lunch and I didn't realize the plumbing was so bad here. I don't know anything about plumbing or where the tools are and it's pretty embarrassing, so I think you should do it. What? Pardon me, did you just… Oh, okay then, change the subject. On her next shift, she began giving orders to other servers, to the bartender and the support staff to do things. She had to be reminded of her own login code 3 times, but felt the need to comment on how cocktails should be made. And worse, she was wrong about half of her suggestions, so everyone was third-party embarrassed. Correcting her about anything meant you would have to prolong the discussion, so people just bit their cheeks. She reorganized parts of the restaurant nobody asked her to and then complained about having to put it back when the manager asked her why she was disorganizing the restaurant on the clock. She was straight up witchy with people on the phone, low tippers, and even the owner. She was pretty and seemed normal enough until you spent time with her. She kind of looked like Ariana Grande when she was a Disney TV starlet, but short and a little thick. Nice big smile and soft voice, but utterly insane. Imagine, on your second day at work, telling the woman who's been there 20 years that she's not doing something correctly. I asked if she wanted to stay for a drink after work, at which point she accepted and then walked out on the bill, which I covered. She told me she had to run because she'd signed up for a Sugar Babies account and was meeting with a potential client and hoped this would work out because she was behind on rent and she only wanted to do the ballers. We were totally not on those kind of friendly terms. We had probably talked about where she'd worked previously in her hometown, and then bam, more things nobody asked to know. Smile and nod, but I'm just like, what the heck? On our next and final shift together, I show up to see she's eating 2 entire plates of food, like entrees. She may as well have dislocated her jaw like a trapdoor, thrown her head back, and dumped the plates. This was pretty awkward because a week ago she'd announced to everyone during the meet and greet she was a raging bulimic and here she is eating roughly my 36-hour caloric intake in a single sitting, and I'm not cleaning up her mess again, so I just straight up asked her, not necessarily in my indoor voice, why she was eating so much if she just told everyone she was going to retch it up. She laughs and says, oh well, I decided to go back to being chubby. And I was like, all right, cool, but can't you just not binge eat and not throw up and love your body and be healthy? These extremes are a little disturbing. She laughs some more. No, it's not about body image or anything. It's just that I've got some new clients and a business model around seeing how fat I can get. She then went on into glorious detail about how lucrative it can be for a cam girl. My old manager was a cam girl and made 6 figures in a year as an entirely average looking, and I don't judge, so I was like, all right, that's fine. But then she described in all detail how many pounds she was projecting to gain per day and how folks were already sending her hundreds of dollars in tips for her to consume as much food as possible. I later looked into this industry later on and realized she was right on the money, no pun intended, and there's millions of dollars floating around out there for girls who get chubby in real time. I only spoke with her briefly and left. She got fired a couple hours later for doing substances in the bathroom and giving one to our regulars who just gotten married the day before, which I found out the next day. I hope you're having your best fat girl summer, Sarah, and you should probably stick to what you know. Story 20. Oh boy, I've got a story that has stayed with me for over, 20 years and still gives me a fright every now and then. So this was in the year 2000 in India. I was sitting with a bunch of friends at about 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. They were drinking when one of them decided that they wanted to smoke some grass. I hadn't yet had a drink, so it was only logical that I drive. So one of the dudes I didn't know that well said he'd come with me and we took off. Buying grass in India is a risky affair and it gets sold only in the worst places. This particular day, we struck out at the regular dealer, so we decided to go some other place. No luck there either. That's when the guy with me says he knows a place to get some. Cool. Turns out his place was a cemetery in one of the shadier parts of town. But big deal, let's go. So we rode halfway across the city to the cemetery. I am not liking the look of this by this point, but there is hardly anything I can do now, is there? So we tip the security guard to let us in, and he tells us to go to the far end of this giant cemetery. I don't know how many of you have been in Indian cemeteries, but they're spooky places, overgrown with giant trees and inhabited by users after dark. So we ride past what appears to be all the users in the city, only to find out that the dealer is sold out. As we're standing contemplating our luck, we see another couple of dudes off to one, huddling over a bike. They're young, seem chilled, so this crazy guy with me decides to ask them if they know a place. Like I said, they were chill dudes, tell us that they came to the cemetery for substances but have grass back at their place. By this time, it was 1 a.m. and the frustration had set in. Against my better judgment, I listened to my companion who wanted to go to these guys' place and buy the grass off of them. So another 20-minute ride later, we reach what is a bad part of town. Not somewhere you want to be seen after dark. You're a target for thugs, cops, and any lowlife. We follow these guys and go into the street and a gully after a tiny lane and come up to a ratty, half-demolished apartment building where the guys stopped and got off. Every one of my nerves are begging me to get out of there. They tell us to follow them to their apartment and we go. We get to an apartment that is a creepy house, no lights, no fans, no air conditioning. The place is reeking of human sweat and failed dreams, so I can't see a single human in the living room. They tell us to follow them into another room, which we do, and about 15 individuals are in that pitch black room, surrounding a couple of open bottles with candles in them. I tell myself, why me? I don't even smoke grass, for God's sakes. My night takes a turn for the worse when my companion decides to chill out for a few minutes with these dudes at their invitation. This is the middle of a creepy house, and I cannot argue with this. I could have ended my companion at this point. I swear to Lord, I can still taste the bile rising in my throat when he told me that. So there I am, sitting in a chair in the dark, surrounded by users. It turns out these guys don't even know each other. The house is just an open invitation for anyone with some substances to come. In about 15 minutes, everyone there is on to something when someone new walks in. He walks to a chair in the far end of the room, plops himself down on it, and suddenly yells out in pain. Turns out he sat on a needle. He walks out when the two guys sitting next to the chair start snickering. One of them turns to me and says that the chair was used by another user who was positive, implying that it was his needle. It was so matter of fact, like they knew they were all destined to pass away because of the needle one way or the other. I left that apartment and rode home and went back to bed. I had about 3 tests over the next 2 to 3 months, checking for any infection. That was among the most frightening things that has happened to me in the last 20 to 25 odd years. Story 21. When I worked at an amusement park, I was a games associate. A little girl between ages of 6 to 8 came up to me and said she couldn't find her parents. I asked her if she wanted help finding them, and she said no because they will be mad at her and they will hurt her, and she doesn't know how bad they will hurt her. She was crying and pretty upset. She reached for a hug, so even though it was against the rules, I gave her a hug and picked her up and told her she wouldn't have to worry about them hurting her again. I thought it was weird she was wearing a long-sleeve shirt and some leggings in the summer. Long story short, I took her up to her. We had police officers there daily, and they ended up finding bruises and burns and scars all over her arms and legs. I never found out much except for the fact she was removed from her parents' home and was in a foster home. That was almost 4 years ago. I hope she's doing better. I got fired a couple weeks after that because I broke the rules by holding and picking her up. Understandable, I suppose. Well, if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.